Okay, so this is social stratification, which correlates to Chapter 7 in the real world and the PowerPoints that are labeled social stratification. So on slide 6, we start out with the definition of social class. I've mentioned it a couple of times, especially when I start talking about the matrix of oppression. So with social class, you are looking at the system of social stratification for capitalist societies. What happens in this case is social class actually ranks according to wealth, property, power, and prestige. Okay, so what happens with social class is that it's measured by an index of variables that we call socioeconomic status, or SES. In fact, most sociologists will refer to SES rather than saying out socioeconomic status because it's a lot easier. Now, usually on this exam, I will have students come up to me during the exam and say, "What's SES?" Well, you have to know that for the exam, SES is socioeconomic status. Now, I said it was an index of variables, which means that you look at a bunch of variables and put them all together to create a larger measure. Okay. So what happens is the first variable in socioeconomic status is your income, and that is how many dollars you make in a given year. Usually this is measured by your income tax, which would have been due in about a week, but right now then has been pushed back to July. Income then, how many dollars a year you earn. Now, America tends to go on income alone, but it doesn't really paint a complete picture because all you're doing is saying, well, this is how much I earn within a year without accounting for anything else. So the second variable that we look at is the variable of wealth. Now, what is the difference between wealth and income? Well, wealth essentially takes this idea of your income and then adds or subtracts from it. That is, you add, and this is very few of people in the United States right now, is if you look at the different assets that are available. Now, primary asset that you can have in the United States is owning your own home, because essentially it's an investment. You pay for your mortgage every month, and at the end you own a house that you can actually sell for more money. Now, for those of us who rent, then rent actually then kind of, you pay your rent, but there's nothing at the end because you have to move out, and basically you have spent your money. So your assets then are part of wealth. For many more of us, then we look at the debt that we have over the assets that we have. That is right now, and I've mentioned it multiple times in the class, that America is facing a huge crisis with student loan debt. It is the biggest source of debt that we have right now. And like I said before, we really do have to think this one out because right now the numbers are not working out. Okay, so along with student loan debt, you also look at credit card debt. You look at things like your car payment, etc., because cars depreciate in value rather quickly. So income and wealth. The third one is educational attainment, because that is the traditional means to actually earn money in the United States. So we look at educational attainment as another variable on the index of SES. The last one's a little bit more mushy. That is the idea of occupational prestige, right? And when you think about it, some occupations are a lot more prestigious than others. That is, if you're a CEO, it's prestigious. If you are a medical doctor, then it is prestigious. And then even within the field of medicine, if you are a surgeon, if you are a specialist, that is actually more prestigious than being a general practitioner or a pediatrician, right? Now, occupational prestige, like I said, it gets kind of mushy, but you actually can think of it as, well, this is how mainstream society thinks of these different jobs. Now, what I said before is that when you look at it, there generally is a correlation. That is, if you look at the idea of being a janitor, not paid very much, also not very much occupational prestige. However, right now we can actually say it's a very, very important job because, especially because of the spread of germs, that the people disinfecting our buildings and actually have a crucial and valuable job. Okay. So what happens with social class is not these variables don't always line up. Income, right? Wealth, educational attainment, and occupational prestige. On slide 7, then, I look at this idea of status inconsistencies. And I'll just read the definition that I have here. A situation in which an individual holds differing and contradictory levels of status in terms of wealth, power, prestige, and other elements of SES. And I included a picture of Taylor Swift because she's actually a good example in terms of status inconsistencies. On slide 8, I give you a couple of examples of status inconsistencies. The first one is, well, professional athletes and celebrities. Generally, what you're seeing in those cases is high income, right? High wealth, unless they spend it faster than they can earn it. So high income and high wealth. But in the case of most celebrities and athletes, you are looking at this idea of fairly low education. Okay? That Taylor Swift has a high school education, but she's also one of the wealthiest people in the world, I think. That when it comes to this idea of occupational prestige, being a star is exactly kind of the highest that you can get. It's this idea of fame and fortune. When you look at this as a total, though, when you look at this idea of celebrity or professional athletes, it is a very, very minute percentage that actually achieve this. But despite all of the money involved, I actually put this statistic, only 20% of the MBA has a college degree, even though you are looking at a lot of them making millions of dollars. Okay. So on the other end, and this is a lot closer to home, your MCC professors then actually are another form of status inconsistency. As an example, then, we actually make a mid-range income. And I already mentioned in class about how an Aldi's assistant manager makes as much as a MCC professor who is starting at MCC. So mid-range income, and when it comes to wealth, what you find is most MCC professors are in negative wealth because most have student loans to pay off, and in some cases, fairly significant student loans, because if you think about it, in order to have a PhD or a master's degree, you're in school for a very long time. For my field, and I think I mentioned it in class, the average time from starting a PhD to ending a PhD is 12 years. So you can imagine how much that costs in terms of student loans. What happens, though, in terms of the other parts of SES, because you're looking at two that are on the lower side, a little bit higher, in that we have very high educational attainment, that if you have a PhD, you are only 3% of the population. So already very, very highly ranked in terms of your educational attainment. Occupational prestige, well, being a professor then, very high prestige. Now remember I said surgeons are ranked higher than general practitioners. Well, being a professor is overall fairly prestigious, but you can imagine that if you teach at a high prestige college, there is then more cachet in that than being a professor at a community college, which is why I always tell you guys, MCC professors actually choose to work here because it is a mission rather than just a career or a job. Okay. So on slide 9, I actually show you guys how this breaks down in terms of the distribution in the United States. Now you've heard of the famous 1%, right? And that is known as the upper class. Now 1%, you're looking at the wealthiest in our society. It says typical household income is $2 million. Of course, you know what happens with that 1% is that $2 million is kind of the mean of that, but you are looking at an exponential curve. So the people on the very top, and I think Jeff Bezos is the top right now, you're looking at trillions of dollars, not just millions. Okay. In a lot of cases. So you have CEOs, but you also have people who inherited their money. They didn't earn it through their own hard work. It got passed down in their family. You are also looking at celebrities, at sports personalities, etc. Now the upper class. So that was the upper class. The upper class then consists of the next 14% below. So if you are in that top 15%, there's that 1% and the 14% below, then you are considered part of the upper middle class. So that 14% upper middle class. In that case, it says the typical household income is $150,000. Once again, that is kind of the low end. You are looking at pretty much a very, very wide range in terms of the upper middle class. In this case, you're looking at professionals, you're looking at managers, you're looking at people with a, medical degree, dental degree, etc., etc. In this case, then, as you can imagine, in terms of educational attainment, you are looking at a match pretty much in terms of income, educational attainment, and wealth. Now, given the choice, most Americans actually identify as being middle class. 30% of the overall population falls within the middle class, and the typical household income that's listed on the slide 9 is $70,000 a year. In this case, you're looking at white-collar jobs, managerial positions. You're looking at highly skilled blue-collar jobs. And in most cases, if you're working class, you either have a 2-year to 4-year college degree. Now, the working class, which is known as the lower middle class, is another 30%. Okay. In this case, you're looking at the typical household income being around $40,000 a year. And in this case, you're looking at semi-skilled labor, service, manual jobs, and clerical jobs. And in terms of the working class, mostly you're looking at high school and associate's degrees. Now, the working poor actually makes up 13% of our society. Okay. And in that case, you're looking at a typical household income of about $25,000 a year. In fact, our poverty level is drawn along those lines. You're looking at right now about $24,000 a year for a family of 4. Now, if some of you guys went, well, that doesn't sound right, it doesn't sound right. I'm going to go into that in a little bit. But the working poor, then, you're looking at average around $25,000 a year. So this would be low and unskilled workers, people who are paid in the manual and service jobs. You're also looking at seasonal work. And when you look at MCC students, because you're students right now, a lot of the jobs that you have actually fall along the lines of the working poor. Now, the last category in this is known as the underclass. That is 12% of the population, and it's looking at people who make $15,000 a year or less. Now, what happens in this case is you're looking at people who are employed part-time. You're looking at people who do seasonal work. And then in a lot of cases, people who are on unemployment or who are not working. Okay. Right now, we are probably going to see a spike in the underclass, especially because the virus has kind of put a lot of people out of jobs. Most of you have been following the news, found out that there are 6.6 million people on unemployment right now. So at this current moment, our underclass is probably bigger than it usually is. Okay. So when it comes to social class, you are looking at this idea that it looks kind of like a pyramid, right? With 1% then having most of the money in the United States, with the bottom percentage then making the least. And so it looks like a pyramid with the very few people on top earning the most. Okay, so I've given you a video on wealth inequality in America to watch so that you can learn a little bit more about this distribution and why it looks so unequal, essentially. Don't mind the ominous music in the background. Just listen to what he's saying. I think the music kind of adds dramatic flair, but it is also very ominous. So I'm going to stop right now, have you guys watch that video, and when we come back, I'm going to throw a bunch of numbers at you.